The Battle of Pilckem Ridge, the 31st of July, the 2nd of August 1917, was the opening attack of the main part of the Third Battle of Ypres in the First World War. The battle took place between British, French and German armies in the Ypres Salient of the Western Front. After several weeks of changeable weather, heavy rainfall had begun on the afternoon of the 31st of July and blocked the view of British observers over the troops that had advanced through the blue and black objective lines to the green line and then exploited towards the red line on the 19th Corps front. Just as German regiments from specialist counter-attacking Eingreif divisions intervened, the British were forced back to the black line, where the British artillery observers still had a view, and the German counter-attack was stopped by massed artillery and small arms fire. The Entente attack had mixed results. A substantial amount of ground was captured by the 2nd, 5th and French 1st Armies, except on the tactically vital Galliveld Plateau on the right flank, where only the blue and part of the black line were captured. A large number of casualties were inflicted on the German defenders and 5,626 German prisoners were taken. The Germans recaptured some ground on the 19th Corps front, from the Ypres-Roulis Railway northwards to St. Julien. For the next few days both sides made local attacks to improve the positions, much hampered by the wet weather. The rains had a serious effect on operations in August, causing more problems for the British and French, who were advancing into the area devastated by artillery fire and partly flooded. The Third Battle of Ypres became controversial, with disputes about the predictability of the August deluges and for its mixed results, which in much British writing were blamed on misunderstandings between Gough and Haig and on faulty planning, rather than on the resilience of the German defense. Background. Strategic background. Operations in Flanders, Belgium had been desired by the British Cabinet, Admiralty and War Office since 1914. Douglas Haig succeeded John French as Commander-in-Chief of the British Expeditionary Force on 19 December, 1915. A week after his appointment, Haig met Vice Admiral Reginald Bacon, who emphasized the importance of obtaining control of the Belgian coast, to end the threat from German naval forces based in Bruges. In January 1916, Haig ordered General Henry Rawlinson to plan an attack in the Ypres Salient. The need to support the French army during the Battle of Verdun, the 21st of February, the 18th of December 1916, and the demands of the Somme battles, the 1st of July 18. November 1916, absorbed the British Expeditionary Force's offensive capacity for the rest of the year. On the 22nd of November, Haig, Chief of the Imperial General Staff William Robertson, First Sea Lord Admiral Henry Jackson and Dover Patrol Commander Vice Admiral Reginald Bacon, wrote to General Joffre urging that the Flanders operation be undertaken in 1917, which Joffre accepted. In late 1916 and early 1917, military leaders in Britain and France were optimistic that the casualties they had inflicted on the German army at the Battle of Verdun, the Battle of the Somme on the Eastern Front, had brought the German army close to exhaustion, although the effort had been immensely costly. At the conference in Chantilly in November 1916 and a series of subsequent meetings, the Entente agreed on an offensive strategy to overwhelm the Central Powers by means of simultaneous attacks on the Western, Eastern and Italian fronts. The Prime Minister David Lloyd George sought to limit British casualties and proposed an offensive on the Italian front. British and French artillery would be transferred to Italy to add weight to the offensive. This suggestion was opposed by the French and Italian delegations and the British General Staff, at least covertly, and was discarded. The new French commander-in-chief, Robert Nivelle, believed that a concentrated attack by French forces on the Western Front during the spring of 1917 could break the German front and lead to a decisive victory. The Nivelle plan was welcomed by the British, despite many in the cabinet and War Office being skeptical, because a French attack would mean a lesser burden falling on the British. Haig was ordered to cooperate with Nivelle but secured French agreement that in the event the offensive failed, the British would attack in Flanders with French support. On the 9th of April, British Empire forces undertook a preliminary attack at the Battle of Ypres, and the Nivelle offensive began on the 16th of April. The French attack gained ground at great cost but no breakthrough, leading to open warfare, and the decisive defeat of the German army occurred, leading to Nivelle being replaced by Philippe Pétain, a collapse in morale and mutinies in the French armies. While the French recuperated, offensive action on the Western Front could only come from the BEF. It was not until June 1917 that the principle of a Flanders campaign was approved by the British cabinet, and more grudgingly by the Prime Minister, against his preference for an Italian campaign. Haig ordered General Herbert Plumer, the commander of the Second Army which occupied the Ypres Salient, to produce a plan in late 1916. Haig was dissatisfied with the limited scope of Plumer's plan for the capture of Messines Ridge and Pilckem Ridge. By early 1917, Haig felt that Nivelle's ambitious attempt at a decisive battle would either force the Germans to abandon the Belgian coast, or that the German Fourth Army in Flanders would have divisions taken away to replace losses further south. Plumer produced a revised plan, in which in the first stage Messines and Pilckem Ridges would be captured, with an advance some distance onto the Galliveld Plateau. Soon afterwards, an attack would be made across the Galliveld Plateau, to Passchendaele and beyond. Plumer believed that a force of 35 divisions and 5,000 guns would be necessary, which was far greater than the amount of artillery in the BEF. Haig also asked for an assessment from Colonel McMullen on the General Headquarters Staff, who proposed that the Galliveld Plateau be taken by a mass tank attack, reducing the need for artillery. In April, a reconnaissance by Captain Giffard Lecaine Martel found that the area was unsuitable for tanks, because of narrow defiles between the three woods obstructing the approaches on the high ground and the broken state of the terrain. The tanks would have to detour north of Bellewaerde Lake to Westhoek, then wheel right at the German Albrecht line. Plumer produced a second revision of his plan. Messines Ridge and the west end of the Galliveld Plateau would be attacked first, and then Pilckem Ridge a short while later. The Fourth Army commander, General Henry Rawlinson, proposed a plan to take Messines Ridge, then the Galliveld Plateau and Pilckem Ridge within 47 to 72 hours. On the 14th of February, after discussions with Rawlinson, Plumer and Haig, McMullen submitted a memorandum which became the GHQ 1917 plan. On the 7th of May, Haig set the timetable for the preliminary attack on Messines Ridge and the Flanders offensive some weeks later. A week after the Battle of Messines Ridge, Haig informed his army commanders that his objectives were to wear down the German army, secure the Belgian coast and connect with the Dutch frontier. The armies were to capture Passchendaele Ridge and advance on Roulers and Thorout, to cut the railway supplying the German garrisons holding the Western Front north of Ypres and the Belgian coast. An attack by the Fourth Army would then begin on the coast, combined with Operation Hush in support of the main advance to the Netherlands frontier. On the 13th of May, Haig appointed General Hubert Goff to command the Ypres operation and the coastal force. McMullen gave Goff the GHQ 1917 plan the next day. Prelude. Entente offensive preparations. Goff held meetings with his corps commanders on 6 and on 16 June, where the third objective of the GHQ 1917 plan, which included the German Wilhelm Line, was added to the first and second objectives to be taken on the first day. A fourth objective was also given for the first day, but was only to be attempted opportunistically. In places where the German defense had collapsed, Gough intended to use 5 divisions from the Second Army, 9 divisions and 1 brigade from the Fifth Army and 2 divisions from the French First Army. Gough planned a preparatory bombardment from 16 to 25 July. The Second Army was to create the impression of a more ambitious attack beyond Messines Ridge by capturing outposts in the Warrenton Line. The Fifth Army was to attack along a front of approximately 14,000 yards, running from Clydesdalebeek in the south to the Ypres-Steden Railway in the north, with the French First Army on the northern flank attacking with 2 divisions. For the boundary with the 14th Corps north to the flooded area just beyond Steenstraat, the infantry trained on a replica of the German trench system, built using information from aerial photographs and trench raids. Specialist platoons were given additional training on methods to destroy German pillboxes and blockhouses. The attack was not a breakthrough attempt, for the 4th German defensive position Flandern I lay 10,000–12,000 yards behind the front line, well beyond the 4th objective. Behind Flandern I were Flandern II and Flandern III. In his operation order of 27 June to the Fifth Army Corps commanders, Gough gave the Green Line as the main objective. Advances towards the Red Line were to be made by patrols of fresh troops to take vacant ground that was tactically valuable, exploiting any German disorganization in the first 24 hours. The Fifth Army plan was more ambitious than Plumer's version, which had involved a shallower advance of 1,000–1,750 yards on the first day. Major General John Davidson, Director of Operations at General Headquarters, expressed concern that there was ambiguity as to what was meant by a step-by-step attack with limited objectives. Davidson suggested reverting to an advance of no more than 1,500–3,000 yards, to increase the concentration of British artillery. Gough's reply stressed the need to plan for opportunities to take ground left temporarily undefended, and that this was more likely in the first attack that would have the benefit of a longer period of preparation. After discussions at the end of June, Haig endorsed the Fifth Army plan, as did Plumer, the Second Army commander. The front held by the French extended 4.3 miles from Bozinghay to the north of Nordschute, the ground to the north being a morass created by the Belgians when they flooded the area during the Battle of the Ypres in 1914. A paved road between Renninge, Nordschute and Driegrachten ran on a bank just above the water level. Into the inundations ran the Kemmelbeek, Ypres and Marchevat. Between Nordschute and the Maison du Passeur pillbox, the opposing lines were separated by a wide stretch of ground, which was mostly flooded. At the Maison du Passeur there was a French outpost on the east side of the Ypres, connected with the west bank by a footbridge. For this point to Steenstraat, no man's land was about 200 to 300 yards wide. From Bozinghay to Steenstraat, the Ypres running from Ypres formed the front line. The German trenches were on dry ground but barely above water level, and parapets and breastworks had been built up, rather than trenches dug. It had proved impossible to build concrete artillery observation posts, which left the position vulnerable to a surprise attack. The intended slow build-up of Allied air activity over the Ypres Salient was changed to a maximum effort after a weather delay on the 11th of July, due to the extent of the opposition of the Luftstreitkraft. The Germans had been sending larger formations into action, and on the 12th of July, the greatest amount of air activity occurred since the beginning of the war. 30 German fighters engaged Royal Flying Corps and French fighters of the Service Aéronautique in a dogfight lasting an hour, the RFC losing 9 aircraft and the Luftstreitkraft 14. The Germans resisted the British and French air effort until the end of July, when the losses forced to change to more defensive tactics. The attack was delayed on the 1st of July, at the request of Antoine, as the French needed more time to prepare artillery emplacements. On the 7th of July, Gough asked for another postponement of 5 days. Some British heavy artillery had been lost to the German counter-bombardment. Some had been delayed, and bad weather had hampered the program of counter-battery fire. Haig agreed to delay until the 28th of July. Antoine then requested another delay because the poor weather had slowed his artillery preparation, and after Gough supported Antoine, Haig reluctantly agreed to delay to the 31st of July, even though this meant postponing Operation Hush from 7 to 8 August, to the next period of high tides. Plan of attack. The first of a series of set-piece attacks was to begin with an advance to 3 objectives, the blue, black and green lines, through the German front line system, and then the Albrecht and Wilhelm lines, which were approximately 1,000, 2,000 and 3,500 yards from the British front line, at any of which a halt could be called if necessary. Local advances to the Red Line 1,000–1,500 yards further forward, by patrols from the reserve brigades into undefended ground, were left to the discretion of divisional commanders. The Fifth Army had 752 heavy guns and 1,442 field guns, with support from 300 heavy guns and 240 field guns belonging to the French First Army in the north, and 112 heavy guns and 210 field guns of the Second Army to the south. Gough also intended to use 120 tanks to support the attack, with another 48 held in reserve. Gough had 5 divisions of cavalry in reserve, a brigade of which was to be deployed if 14th Corps reached its objectives. The preliminary bombardment was intended to destroy German strong points and trenches, cut barbed wire entanglements around German positions, and to suppress German artillery with counter-battery fire. The first wave of infantry would advance under a creeping barrage, moving at 100 yards every 4 minutes, followed by more infantry advancing in columns or in artillery formation. British intelligence expected the Germans to make the Albrecht line their main line of resistance and to hold back counter-attacks until the British advance reached it, except on the Galliveld Plateau, where British intelligence expected the Germans to counter-attack quickly. Given the importance of this commanding ground to both sides, Second Corps faced the Galliveld Plateau and was given closer objectives than the other Fifth Army Corps. 1,000 yards forward at Clydesdalebeek in the south, and 2,500 yards at the junction with 19th Corps on the Ypres Railway to the north. Second Corps had 5 divisions at its disposal, compared to 4 each in the 19th, 18th and 14th Corps. 3 divisions and a brigade from one of the 2 divisions in reserve would attack with support from approximately 43% of the Fifth Army artillery and the artillery of 10th Corps on the left flank of the Second Army. Footnotes and appendices in the history of the Great War show that, far from neglecting Haig's desire to concentrate on the Galliveld Plateau, Gough put a disproportionate amount of the Fifth Army artillery at the disposal of Second Corps for the 3 and of 3rd Divisions engaged on the 31st of July, compared to 4 divisions with 2 engaged and 2 in reserve in the other corps, with an average of 19% of the 5th Army artillery each. The green line for Second Corps was the shallowest, from a depth of 1,000 yards on the southern flank at Clydesdale to 2,500 yards on the northern flank along the Ypres Railway. The green line from the southern flank of 19th Corps to the northern flank of 14th Corps required an advance of 2,500–3,500 yards. The French First Army had the 29th Division and 133rd Division of the 36th Corps and the 1st Division, 2nd Division, 51st Division and 162nd Division of 1st Corps. The 1st Corps had suffered many casualties in the Nivelle offensive but had been recruited mainly from northern France and had been rested from 21 April until the 20th of June. The 36th Corps had garrisoned the North Sea coast since 1915 and had not been involved in the mutinies that took place on the Aisne front. The First Army was given 240 times 75 mm field guns, 277 trench artillery pieces, 176 heavy howitzers and mortars, 136 heavy guns and 64 super heavy guns and howitzers, 22 being of 305 mm or more, 893 guns and mortars for 4.3 miles of front. The 1 Army QT had relieved the Belgian 4th Division and 5th Division from Boesinghe to Nordschute from 5 to 10 July. The 1 Army QT was to advance with the 1st and 51st Divisions of 1st Corps on the left of the 5th Army as flank protection against a German counter-attack from the north. The operation involved a substantial advance over difficult country to capture the peninsula between the floods at the Margevart, St. Jansbeek stream and the land between there and the Ypres Canal south of Nordschute. The advance was to be by bounds to objective lines behind a creeping barrage moving at 90 meters every 4 minutes, with pauses to make sure that the French barrage kept pace with the British barrage. The first objective was the 2 German lines east of the Ypres Canal and the second objective was the German Third Line. A total advance of 5,000 yards to the Red Line was not fundamental to the plan, being an attempt to provide enough discretion to the divisional commanders to make local advances without the need to request permission, based on the extent of local German resistance, in accordance with the Manual SS 135. This was intended to avoid situations that had occurred in previous offensives, when vacant ground had not been promptly occupied and had then to be fought for in later attacks. Had the German defense collapsed and the Red Line been reached, the German Flandern I-2 and 3 lines would have been intact, except for Flandern I-4 a mile south of Broodseinde. On the 10th of August, 2nd Corps was required to reach the Black Line of the 31st of July, an advance of 400 to 900 yards, and at the Battle of Longyearbyen on the 16th of August, the 5th Army was to advance 1,500 yards. German defensive preparations. The German 4th Army operation order for the defensive battle was issued on the 27th of June. The German 4th Army had about 600 aircraft of the Luftstreitkraft, 200 being single-seat fighters. Eventually 80 German air units operated over the Flanders front. German defenses had been arranged as a forward zone, main battle zone, and rearward battle zone. The defense in depth began with a front system of 3 breastworks, each about 200 yards apart, garrisoned by the 4 companies of each front battalion, with listening posts in no man's land. About 2,000 yards behind these works was the Albrecht line, a secondary or artillery protective line that marked the rear boundary of the forward zone. Companies of the support battalions were located at the back of the forward zone, with half in the pillboxes of the Albrecht line. Dispersed in front of the Albrecht line were divisional sharpshooter machine gun nests. The Albrecht line marked the front of the main zone, with the Wilhelm line located a further 2,000 yards away, marking the rear of the main zone. This zone contained most of the field artillery supporting the front divisions. In pillboxes of the Wilhelm line were reserve battalions of the frontline regiments in divisional reserve. The rearward zone, located between the Wilhelm line and Flandern I, contained the support and reserve assembly areas for the Eingreif divisions. The German failures at the Battle of Verdun in December 1916 and at the Battle of Ypres in April 1917 had given more importance to these areas. Since the forward zones had been overrun and the garrisons lost, it was anticipated that the main defensive engagement would take place in the main battle zone, against attackers who had been slowed and depleted by the forward garrisons, reinforced if need be by the Eingreif divisions. The Germans planned a rigid defense of the front system and forward zone, supported by counterattacks. Local withdrawals, according to the concept of elastic defense, was rejected by Lossberg, the new Fourth Army Chief of Staff, who believed that they would disorganize troops moving forward to counter-attack. Frontline troops were not expected to cling to shelters, which were man-traps, but evacuate them as soon as the battle began and move forward into the flanks to avoid British fire and to counter-attack. A small number of machine gun nests and permanent garrisons were separate from the counter-attack organization, to provide a framework for the re-establishment of defense in depth once an attack had been repulsed. German infantry equipment had recently been improved by the arrival of 36 MG08, 15 machine guns per regiment, which gave German units more means for fire and maneuver.